Hello and welcome to IMTV. This is your host, Adam Booth. I'm the editor of Socialist.net, the website of Socialist Appeal, the British section of the International Marxist Tendency. And tonight I'm very pleased to have a guest, a comrade from Italy, speaking to us about the situation there. Italy, as you're aware, is several weeks really ahead of Britain in terms of the coronavirus crisis. Is one of the first countries to have a mass outbreak after China and some other countries like Iran. And it's escalated very quickly there. And tonight, Claudio Bellotti, who I've got on a conference call. Hello, Claudio. Can you hear me?
Hello, everybody.
So, Claudio, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us really you're basically speaking to us from the future in some respects. You're an estimated 3 weeks ahead, they think, in Britain. And, you know, in many respects, you know, what you're seeing in Italy at the moment is what we can expect in Britain, I imagine, in maybe 3 weeks, maybe even less. It's taken people by surprise, really, in Britain, how quickly things have changed in the last week. People's lives have been upturned in just the space of days. And the government doesn't seem to have any clue of what to do here, but surely they should be looking at Italy to see what's in store, people in Britain, the government. So can you tell us how did things escalate in Italy, and you know, how fast did things change, and what kind of measures did the government bring in, and how quickly did the whole of society get transformed?
Yes, I think that you are on a main point. The acceleration here was brutal, as by the end of February, most of people still were behaving almost like normal, apart from a few so-called red zones, red areas. We just covered about 50,000 people, so a very restricted area. And apart from the schools and universities shut down, everything was almost normal on a business as usual footings. And then there was, as I said, a brutal acceleration when on 8th of March, the government created a very wide red zone covering about 15 million people in Lombardia, in Emilia and Veneto. And 36 hours later, that was extended to the whole country on the 9th of March. And then 2 days later, further 2 days, new measures, new prescriptions were given about shutting down almost all trades except for food stores, supermarkets, and other necessary stores and trades. And so in a matter of days, actually, people found their life completely overhauled and changed dramatically. I think that part of the reasons for this acceleration was the contradictory nature of the government measures up until that point, and even today, as I'm going to explain, because I can guess that from abroad, from outside, you might get the impression that Italy is taking very strong, very stern measures to contain the virus, to really try to abide to the rules, to the prescriptions in order to stop it as soon as possible. But as a matter of fact, it was a complete mess for several weeks due to the political weakness and contradictions of this government, which is an unstable coalition. And in general, the political system is ridden with conflicts, with contradictions, and that also exacerbated the problems. For instance, contradictions between the national government and the regional governments, and so on. And so people really couldn't grasp and couldn't see the real nature of the real meaning of the decrees and of the measures which were taken by the government. Just to give one instance, we had at a certain point schools and university closed, bars open only from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And for a couple of days, there was also the idea that some football match could be held with the public, open, but only from some regions. I mean, people from one region could go, and other people, fans from other regions, could not attend. And so this, of course, created the idea of big confusion and didn't help people to understand the real position. As a matter of fact, still today, the main weakness and the main contradiction of these decrees is that it shut down basically every activity except for industries. And a lot of workplaces are still operating. 2 days ago or yesterday, a research center of the trade unions estimated that 9 million people are still going to work. And not by chance, they also tracked using mobile phones or smartphone tracking. They estimated that 40% of the population still moves every day. And this means people go to the office, to the factory, travel on a bus or on a train or on a tube, which is often, quite often, really crowded because public transport cut down the service, and so on. So this is clearly creating a danger and also a contradiction, because the government is insisting every day you must stay at home, you get fined, you can get even can be put on trial because if you don't follow the stay at home rule, but at the same time you are asked to go to work every day for millions of people, certainly not all of them employed in necessary and critical services. And this adds to the question that in many of these workplaces that there are no really real safety measures regarding the question of the virus, or there are no safety measures at all. And so this is creating a lot of pressure, a lot of confusion, and certainly is not the best way and the most effective way to fight this contagion, which is, of course, a very serious risk and danger for the population.
Thank you, Claudio. And in Britain, I think we've just headed over the 100 mark in terms of numbers of deaths. Can you explain a bit about how bad it is in terms of in Italy and the impact that's having on the healthcare system, and in particular on the people who are working in the healthcare system? What kind of pressures are they being put under to address with this crisis? Because from what I understand, Italy's health system is relatively good one. The NHS is like in Italy, I'm sure, has been starved of resources, and austerity has hit it quite hard over the years. So what kind of disaster can we expect in our healthcare system in Britain by looking at the example of Italy?
Well, the figures are staggering. The last figure I saw today is that we had 35,000 people overall which have been tested positive, and 4,000 deaths, which is more than China. They say that most of them are people, elderly people, and people with other pathologies or illness, which might be true, might be the case. It also might be the case that other countries are not are more strict in how they determine whether a victim is caused by the virus or by other factors. But apart from that, it is clear that the impact on not only in terms of victims, but also in terms of people who are in severe conditions, which need to be in an intensive care unit, need ventilators to help them just breathe, and so on, is very high, particularly concentrated in some provinces here in Lombardia, in Bergamo, in Brescia particularly, but also in other areas. And the NHS here used to be a reasonably good system because it was the result of the struggles of the 60s and 70s. So it was won by the working class basically as a universal and free health service 40 years ago. But it has been constantly undermined, both in terms of financing, both in terms of reducing the facilities, the hospitals, the structures in general, the number of people working in it, and also by transforming it in some sort of mixed system where a lot of private health companies, hospitals, clinics, and so on, work for the public, are funded by the state, but they are privately owned and run. And so this means that as far as this crisis is concerned, that even in the richest areas of the country, because Lombardia is the richest region and Emilia and Veneto are close to it, the NHS has been quite easily saturated, reached its limits, up to the point that the government issued a shameful decree or measure which says that if a doctor or a nurse is suspected to be to be infected, it won't be tested immediately. If he or she doesn't show open, clear symptoms, he will continue to work until he or she will show symptoms, and then maybe they will be tested and put into isolation. This means that this personnel is in a very deep danger. It is estimated that 8% of the medical staff, the doctors and nurses, are now infected, which, if I'm not wrong, is the percentage is twice as it was in China. And not to speak about other people who work in hospitals, like janitors, cooks, or auxiliary services, which are almost all outsourced to private companies, which are the worst exploiters, both in terms of wages and conditions. And for instance, 2 janitors have been sacked by an hospital or by the subcontractor because they denounced the fact that they had to work without gloves or without face masks and so on. We received dozens of reports, and I'm talking of reliable reports from our comrades or people who are in touch politically with us, not of just people who like to spread fear and scare, people who work in the NHS, and they are giving us an appalling picture in terms of lack of basic safety measures, lack of shortage of protections, of face masks and so on, and of course also in terms of overworking, working double shifts and so on in order to cover this emergency.
Thank you, Claudio. Just to inform you, we've actually got comrades tuning in from across the world to watch this right now on the In Defense of Marxism YouTube channel. We've got comrades giving solidarity from France, from America, from Britain, from Argentina, and at the bottom here, latest comment from Edgar in London, says he wants to give his deepest gratitude and solidarity to the nurses of the world. So this shows you the fact that comrades are across the world are looking at Italy at these dramatic events. for understanding what's in store for us here and elsewhere, of course. But I also want to talk about the other side of this equation, which is the mood amongst the working class that this is provoking, and the anger that this is creating already in Britain. You can see workers coming out on strike. There's been similar reports in other places of workers striking against the fact that they're being forced to work in these unsafe conditions. And I see that there's similar events taking place in Italy, quite militant events. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Yes, yes. This is one of the main feature of this situation. As I said before, the bosses didn't want to shut down companies, or most of them. And for the whole of the last week or last 10 days, this has been the ground of a major confrontation, including the working class, the bosses, the government, and the trade unions, as I try to explain. Because when the shutdown or the red zone was created all over Italy, the question immediately was raised why we are still going to work if it is so dangerous for us and for other people to stay, to leave home and to go around. Add to this that millions of families now have their kids, children at home since weeks, because schools are closed, and creches, and all levels of education. So nobody is taking care of them. Also, there are some online classes and so on. So there was already a huge pressure, and some strikes began on the 9th of March, most notably a strike in the Fiat plant in Pomigliano d'Arco, which is close to Naples, which erupted spontaneously on the 9th or the 10th of March. And but the turning point was a couple of days later, because when the government issued another decree stating that all shops, all supermarkets, or I mean not supermarkets for food, but other kind of trades should be closed. All bars, all restaurants, all canteens and so on had to be closed. The prime minister went on television explaining the decree, and everybody was expecting he was going to announce some sort of stoppage to also to industrial production and in general to non-essential activities. And nothing of this came. On the contrary, so that was seen. That was a real slap in the face of millions of workers, and that ignited a strike wave, completely spontaneous. I must say that the trade union leaders played no part in that. It was up to the shop stewards or even ordinary workers, which said, "Okay, we are not going to risk our lives or our health for your money." And so there were tens or maybe even hundreds of workplaces who struck in the following 2 or 3 days. I think I cannot give a whole list now, but just to give you an idea, as I said, Fiat plants in Pomigliano, in Sevel, Fincantieri shipyards, chemical industry in Brescia, or all Veneto region, there were widespread strikes. In Emilia, Toyota, Cesab struck, Bonfiglioli struck, dozens of companies, most of them industrial companies. Was a movement, first and foremost, by the industrial working class, because of course, part of the, let's say, white collar or office workers could work on smart working from home, but of course you cannot bring your assembly line at home to manufacture a car or whatever, and also because many of these workplaces are of course overcrowded, and that created a real shockwave in not only the working class but in general in society, because it was clearly a voice which had not been heard up to that point. You only heard the government or the international institutions. And then the working class said, no, we are not taking this and just accept the risk for what? And everywhere when these workers were interviewed on TV, the motto was always the same: we are not cannon fodder, we are not the Spencer. And I must say that our comrades were in the front line of this in several areas. The shop stewards or the comrades or trade union members who belong to our organization really put themselves to the forefront of this struggle. Not only them, of course, everybody who has got a responsibility towards the working class felt the need to do something in order to avoid this. And so this created a new situation, because after 24 hours, the government and the trade union leaders understood that they could not ignore that. And so they decided to open a negotiation between the government, the Confindustria, which is the Italian CBI, the Industrialists Federation, the Bosses Federation, and the main trade unions. They said they had a very harsh discussion going on for 18 hours and so on. And at the end, they produced an agreement, which is another, not only is not enough, but from some points of view is even worse than the situation that we have. There are some concessions, because the government said that they are going to cover partially the wage of workers employed in companies which have to shut down. Consider that there are whole sectors of the economy outside industry, like tourism, which is in Italy is very important, of course, which are restaurants and so on, which are completely broken now and completely on a standstill. So they promised, and they will give at least part of the wage to these workers, and even some money to self-employed workers who lost their wage and their job in these weeks. But on the other side, it didn't say that work had to be stopped. Basically, what they said what the agreement said is that it's up to the company to decide whether they can go on or not, provided that they abide to some rules of caution, like having 1 meter between one worker and another, or giving face masks and so on. And they even applied to the whole of the workforce this infamous rule I spoke about before, that you are not immediately tested and isolated if you have been in touch with people who are tested positive. You can go on to work, and then the company will judge whether it's apt that you go home or you can stay there. So this produced a further wave of strikes, which in some cases got good results. Most of Fiat plants are shut down now. Our comrades actually were instrumental in getting the Ferrari plant in Maranello shut for 2 weeks with full paid by the company. In other factories where maybe the workforce is not so organized, or for any reason they are weaker, but they were able to force agreements with some days of stoppage and maybe a reduced working week or working day in order to minimize the risks, or to operate the company at a minimum pace and not with full workforce and full shifts going on and so on. And this is clearly the result of a change, a deep change in the consciousness of the working class, which had been silent for some time now in Italy, and found itself forced to react in a very short space of time. And the trade union leaders were not leading this, were not promoting this, but at the same time, they are, I could say, given a coverage. I mean, where there is a strike or where there is a struggle, they some way support it and give legitimation to the strikes, to the negotiation, and to the agreements. But certainly they are not leading. And I must say that seeing the same scenes in these last few days of companies shut down in Spain, in Canada, in Belgium, in France. On a similar pattern is I think is a sort of a source of great force for the workers here who know that, and for the commerce here, because they see basically that this crisis is creating the same reaction all over the world. And so I think that this solidarity that comrades are expressing now is only part of the much more general and much more wide process, which is very fastly, in a very fast pace, sweeping the whole of the working class in Europe, and I think in the US and Canada, and basically all over the world, and which is changing consciousness and the political scene.
Thank you, Claudio. And we've had a couple of questions in on the live stream relating to the strikes. And one of them I think you've answered, which is about the role of the union leaders. Geordie from London asks, were these strikes banned by the lockdown legislation, and therefore were they illegal? And Gilly in Britain also asks whether there is a backlash against the government relating to this, in the sense of, has the government actually responded to these strikes, and how is the government in general being seen right now?
Well, the first question about the role of trade unions, I think more or less I answered. I must add that the metal workers union went a little bit further to the general Confederation of Labor, which said basically that they were giving coverage even to an all-out strike, an all-out stoppage until the 22nd of March. That was already they stated publicly last week. But as I said, they are just basically following and trying not to be overlapped by the workers. I must add that before these strikes, the trade union leaders were completely cooperating with the government. They still are. They even went to joint meetings with the Bosses Federation and the government, basically to ask not to shut down too many industries. That was in the first week. So they just followed the tracks of the government and of the bosses. That changed, but partially, very partially, only due to the strikes. As far as bans are concerned, the situation is as follows. With the first decree, there was a ban on strike in public sector for 1 month, and a ban on every public demonstration and any public activity of any sort. You cannot assemble, you can go out alone, basically. And in general, the ban was for the strikes in the public sector and health sector, of course. Of course, the workers in the NHS are not thinking about strikes now, as you can imagine. But that was warmly advised to workers in general not to strike. But in the end, of course, they didn't even dream of using this ban regarding these strikes in industry and transport and so on. I think that if they try to force workers back on work or things like that, that would create really an explosive situation. And I'm saying this because, of course, there is a good measure of authoritarian legislation in all this, but we must not think that we are falling under a totalitarian dictatorship, because this is a weak government and a weak state, and people feel that. But they tried, of course, to use the ban in some cases. For instance, that was a real scandal. They arrested for a few hours, 8 workers from a so-called rank and file union who were striking, not on the strike ban, but on the question of assembling too many people in a small room. They were staying too close to each other, and which is of course a shame. And you can see, if you see pictures or footage of these strikes, you quite often see workers picketing or just staying outside the factory with 1 or 2 meters distance, like on a chessboard or in front of the factory gates. And but there is no way, I think, that they force people back to work with open force, except for some small exceptions. Although, of course, there will be retaliation, and we must say that this is not the case for weaker or less organized sectors of the working class who are subjected to heavy blackmail, casual workers, subcontractors, and so on, who are, of course, under a very hard pressure. And this is still going on. For instance, this morning I saw that in a supermarket in Turin, workers didn't accept to open. They said, we know we must open because people need to buy food, but if you don't provide us face masks and gloves, we will not open. And there are sectors who are under heavy pressure, like transport, shipment, and deliveries, which cannot be completely shut down. So the workers are trying to implement some sort of workers' control, if you like, to reduce the workload, to reduce the presence of the workforce. There is a big problem in the post office. Yesterday, 2 workers died in the Bergamo province. One was working in a post office, and another in a warehouse where post is delivered. And the unions are asking to shut down the service or most of it, but nothing is coming from the government. And so I think that this conflict will go on, because it is a class struggle in its purest form. The workers say, we don't want to risk our life and our health for your money, and the bosses said, we want you to do. And so there is no compromise, or no easy compromise on that. I wouldn't call these, as far as the last question is concerned, strikes against the government. In a certain sense, are strikes by which the workers say, if you are serious, you must be serious towards us too. So workers don't ask the minister to resign or the prime minister to resign or anything of the sort, but certainly is not in support of the government. It's a self-preservation movement, and we are sure that important as they are just only a symptom, because strikes of today are very important. But more important will be the strikes that will follow when this emergency situation comes down or becomes more manageable, which won't be very, very soon, I think. But people are noting down everything that's going on, and this is part of general radicalization. But as I said, the aim of this strike is very clear, very deep, but also very limited. We don't want to go to work for some time in order to preserve ourselves, and then we will settle account later on. I think that's the main mood.
Thank you, Claudio. And just the final question then, really. How do you see the class struggle going forwards in Italy and across the world? Because I think what's becoming very clear to people in Britain very quickly is that this is a crisis of capitalism, and people are being radicalized very quickly, as you say. We've seen lots of reports of people suddenly getting in touch, asking, to get involved in our organization here in Britain. And are you seeing similar developments in Italy? How do you see this panning out going forwards in terms of the class struggle, the radicalization, and where does the organization in Italy fit into this? And what kind of activities are we doing to connect with the mood, and what demands are we raising? What kind of response are we seeing in terms of Marxist ideas in Italy right now?
Well, I think it's even too easy to understand that this situation on a world scale is a qualitative change. And I think it will take some time to measure all its consequences on the economic plane, on the political plane, on the consciousness of the working class, on the consciousness also of the ruling class, which is changing. I must tell you that the rich people in Italy, like Berlusconi, like the Agnelli family, who are owners of Fiat and so on, are rushing in, giving money, 10 million euros each to help the NHS, and I think it's a sign of fear. Everybody knows that this is not just a bad luck or God's punishment. Well, maybe some people will think that, but even in that case, they know that this felt on a situation where the rich people, the ruling class, did whatever they wanted for decades, and particularly the last 10 years after the last big crisis, and this created this situation. And I think that you can compare it to a war in a certain sense, although we hope that the number of victims will not be as high as in a war, but a war which causes shortages, which changes people's life, which took away their freedom, their normal everyday life, which forced them to think in general terms. Beyond their ideas, their prejudices, their experience, the previous thinking, they are forced to change their mindset and their approach to their life, basically. And as in wars, maybe in the first period, in the first epoch, there is also bewilderment, confusion, fear, scare, and also people who support the government and say, okay, let's wave the national flag and hope everything will go for the best. But after a certain time, that will backlash, that will turn into a very angry, militant, and revolutionary mood. Actually, that's the right. That is the right word. And also the question of internationalism, the question of that this is an international problem everywhere. In the richest country of the world, it is not something in Afghanistan, in Iraq, or whatever. I'm talking, of course, from the point of view of people here in Italy or in Europe. It's something in your country, in your home, and in your life. We had to move, of course, all of our operations on the online. The only place where you can do open political activity are the workplaces, but we want them to shut down for the time being. So for the reasons I said, at least for some weeks. But apart from that, but I must say that we are still completely open, if you like. We are not in a quarantine. We are, and most Congress are participating now than in normal times, both in quantitative and qualitative terms. And I'm sure that we are enlarging our periphery, the number of people who follow us, also because nobody's saying nothing really serious about this. In the left, the trade unions, as I said, and so on. And so I think that the IMT, not only in Italy, but everywhere, can and will stand out as the only force who approach this from the point of view of the working class and of its immediate and historical needs, which now are very close and almost coincide. So if there is a message I will try to convey to the Congress abroad, apart from being prepared, because maybe might be 2 weeks, might be 10 days or 3 weeks, but it's very short, very sharp, and very fast. But apart from that, I think just stay united and trust our ideas and trust the organization and trust the working class particularly, because it showed that it can understand, that it is understanding, and it is reacting. And on top of this, we will grow and we will advance. Our ideas will advance because the working class understands and acts accordingly to this new situation. And in this sense, this is a dramatic juncture, if you like. We cannot be like-minded on this. But it's also an historical change that completely vindicate what we have been explaining for years and for decades. And the panic of the ruling class is all too clear, all too clear. They said that the social fabric in Italy is disintegrating. If the factories are revolting, this means that we are on a volcano. That's what they say. And their fear must be our hope and our trust in ourselves and in the future.
Thank you, Claudio. And unfortunately, that's about all we've got time for tonight. But we really appreciate your analysis and hearing from yourself. And we wish the comrades in Italy the best of luck. And stay safe and healthy. And hopefully, we'll see you when the quarantine gets lifted in the future. Um,
Okay.
Thank you very much. Goodbye for now.
Thank you, and goodbye to all the comrades all around the world.
Thank you. So, this is IMTV. I've been Adam Booth, and we're going to be scheduling broadcasts for every time this week, same time this, sorry, Wednesday at 6 o'clock UK time. Every week, we're going to be broadcasting live, interviewing comrades from across the world, in France, in Spain, in other countries. And so tune in the same time next week if you want to hear more Marxist analysis from comrades from the IMT around the world. In the meantime, I would very much recommend heading to our website, Marxist.com. This is an article by Claudio and the comrades in Italy about the situation there. And just go to Marxist.com for all the latest analysis. And you'll see lots of articles, not only on the coronavirus, but other theory, Marxist ideas, and videos as well. So also follow our Facebook page, In Defense of Marxism, and of course the YouTube channel. And of course, like and subscribe to all these things. Share the material widely. We are in self-isolation, all of us, and this is really the only political activity that we're able to do at the present time, but it's very important activity. It's important that we get the ideas out there, Marxist ideas, which are fundamentally the only ideas that can explain what's going on and offer a way forwards for humanity. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.